Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next session immediately following lunch. This following session is one that's really important to us at CUTRIC because we are growing our rail innovation strategy at the organization for the next 5 years. This session's focused on going the distance with Hydrail technology, and for those of you who don't come from the rail sector, that's shorthand for hydrogen rail mobility. With me today, I have Chris Norris, Director of Business Development in the New Energy Business Division at Siemens. We have Noah Hewlett, Vice President of Rolling Stock Sales and Business Development at Alstom, and Jonathan Baines, who's CEO of Coal Management Group. We've had Siemens, Alstom, and Coal Management Group all part of our Rail Innovation Initiative that we ran over 2 years, and we launched the full national report on the top 10 rail innovation projects in Canada about 2 weeks ago. It's available on our website for any participants here at the conference who'd like to take a look at that report, which was our first Knowledge Series report. And interestingly, of those top 10 projects, Hydrail projects figured in the top 3 consistently. So it's a hot topic. It's a topic we've talked about ad nauseum in Canada, and we'd like to see this decade the topic actually materialize into real rolling stock and Hydrail deployments and demonstrations. So with that, and without much ado, I'm going to turn to Chris first to set the scene. And Chris, I'm going to hand the virtual microphone over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Josepha. So Chris Norris with Siemens Energy, and before I dive in, Siemens has some news, and it is that Siemens Energy is being carved out of the larger Siemens. It happened in Canada at the beginning of March, and more news to come. This is all public information. It's just probably not widely known. So in Siemens Energy, we have power generation, as you might expect, transmission, the oil and gas group, who I believe is going to be instrumental in the advent and the expansion of the hydrogen economy because of their capabilities around compression, transmission of gases. And then we have the new energy business, which is primarily focused on hydrogen electrolysis, and that's where I am. So we work closely with our other divisions across the organization, including Siemens Mobility, of course, which is the topic of today's discussion. Sector coupling, I think, is a term that we've heard used fairly often, and often even in this conference, including by Rob Campbell yesterday, who spoke about it when he was from Ballard when he was doing his keynote speech. And we see it as a key part of our strategy, and as hydrogen as being the central focus of sector coupling. In fact, the sort of electrochemical element that will couple these sectors together. So you see with on this figure, hydrogen in the center. In the top left, we have our sources of power in terms of renewable energy. We have the electrolysis pathway to get us to hydrogen. And then among the use cases we see, and bottom left, we see mobility. Rail is one of them, road, mobile, marine, and aviation. But I just bring this up to say, hydrogen, as we all know, is going to be there's going to be a tremendous number of uses, and in order to kickstart the hydrogen economy, we really have to look at all the potential use cases for it. It's heavily reliant on commodity prices, namely electricity, renewable electricity for the generation of hydrogen, and so the more projects, the more uses, the more demand we see for hydrogen, the more economically viable the whole industry becomes. So I'll talk now about Siemens' flagship product for generating hydrogen. And this is the Sealyzer. As you might imagine, Sealyzer is a word combination of Siemens and electrolyzer. This is our 3rd generation electrolyzer. We've been in this business for some time now. This one is commercially available and commercially in use in Europe. This is the base case that you see here. It's 17.5 megawatts of production, so quite a significant amount in this modular unit that can be combined with other units to create a linear increase in the amount of hydrogen produced. It can also be scaled down for smaller applications by removing some of these modules. And the modules that you see there are PEM electrolyte stacks, essentially squeezed together with the anode, cathode, and membrane in between, with gases that evolve from the electrolysis process are collected overhead and pressurized for later use. with 75% efficiency, which is fairly typical for the industry. This produces about 8 tons a day at rated power. So quite a significant, in the mid to high range of hydrogen production. And we anticipate demand. We're seeing a lot of demand for this product and for the hydrogen that it produces. But of course, it's only one product, one component of an overall electrolyzer system that's going to involve taking high voltage from the grid, stepping it down, making it direct current for application in the electrolyzer, cooling systems, compression, storage, infrastructure. Here we show pipelines because, as many of you know, power to gas is one especially early use case for this. But as we evolve the economy, the hydrogen economy, we'll see more use cases, including hydrogen rail. We are working with Ballard to adapt our train platform, the Mirio. So this is the Mirio Plus, we call the Mirio Plus H, with H for hydrogen. And this is a commuter rail car, passenger size in the 100 to 200 range, it'll have Ballard fuel cells on the roof, fuel cell hydrogen storage on the roof. And it's currently in development and in operating in Germany now. So looking at some of the components, of course, it's going to have a battery for regenerative braking and for all the ancillary services. The fuel cell itself, which I won't go into, this is more Ballard's area, hydrogen storage, a control system, and it's built on a platform that is tried and true. Now the question is, and what I hope we will discuss in today's session, is what needs to happen for the demand for this train to increase globally, but also specifically here in Canada. And with that, Joseph, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. In fact, that was a fantastic segue because, of course, there's one thing to get the technology out the door and demonstrate it's commercially available. It's another thing to launch rail in and of itself in Canada, which has been a long-standing issue. So we're going to come back to that, let alone technologically advanced rail. With that, I'm going to turn over to our colleague, Noah Huleti. Noah, over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Josepha. All right.
Just give us one moment. It'll pop up there on the screen for you in just a moment. There you go.
All right, there we go. Outstanding. Thank you. Let's dive right in. My name's Noah Hewlett, and I'm responsible for leading the rolling stock sales and business development for Alstom North America. That includes both Canada and the United States. For those who may or may not be as familiar, Alstom is a global leader within the rail technology sector, and one that really envisions ourselves as becoming the true leader in green mobility for the near and full future. One of the main concepts that we work on is how do we address the challenges around tomorrow's mobility in the most responsible way. This is a true commitment from our organization, from our CEO, all the way down. Well, let's give you a little bit more introduction in and around Alstom as well. So Alstom is roughly a 10 billion euro per year business with a high adjusted EBIT margin. We've been very successful globally, present in over 60 countries with 38,900 employees total. So we are truly a large player within the global market, as well as Canada and the United States in particular. So how are we really truly leading the way through this greener, smarter mobility worldwide? This is not just a rolling stock activity. This is a true life cycle activity where we look at rolling stock, components, our signaling business, the physical infrastructure, the rail systems, and how can we also integrate that into a full, true urban system, as we have currently in Ottawa right now, as we're working as part of the Confederation Line service. So the goal is really we partner with our stakeholders to find what is the true driver, what are the true benefits that they're seeking from these types of mobility solutions, whether it be a hydrogen solution, a battery solution, or the development of more of just simply an EMU or electrical multiple unit service as well. So focusing on our core values around agility, inclusiveness, and responsibility, this is where we lean into. So let's talk about probably the most exciting thing is we have a hydrogen train. It does exist. It is in service. We have current contracts right now in Germany with additional frameworks in France. We've just recently made an agreement with a private firm in Italy to develop further hydrogen train technology with our Karate Island. This is a full emissions-free train that is based off of our Lint DMU program. It is powered right now by 100% hydrogen. There's low noise versus a conventional DMU with equivalent, roughly equivalent total capacity for the internal capacity for passenger side, as well as the overall tripling. So when we're talking about rough equivalents of a diesel tank at 400 rough miles for travel, we've got equivalent performance from our hydrogen supply on board. So we are very proud of that accomplishment and continuing to investigate new ways in which we can bring this technology over to both Canada and the United States. With some barriers to entry as we see right now, and I can talk a little bit on some of our questions and challenges, in light of where we are with COVID-19 and transportation funding, how do we maintain and keep these programs on track? Because due to the novel nature of the technology, it does require a higher level of initial funding to get these programs moving forward. When we're talking similarly about fueling, what is the availability and pricing of hydrogen in North America? There are certain pockets where it's much more prevalent. When we're talking about Vancouver, for instance, certain areas of Southern California, hydrogen is prevalent, but is not as prevalent in other areas within both the United States and Canada. Also looking at how do we overcome some of these more challenging initial costs for development and homologation. Within the United States and in Canada in particular, we have challenging homologation standards, both through the FRA in the United States and Transport Canada as well, and other associated standards that differ from our EN standards or in which our trains were built upon. So making it across and bridging the gap is a challenge that we need to continue to work with our stakeholders on to how do we address. And then again, exploring other areas in which we can find additional opportunities, in particular around the single largest diesel segment in North America, the freight locomotives. So we continue to explore that opportunity. We're very, very excited about the potential and happy to talk with this panel here today.
That's fantastic, Noah, and you've segued into a larger dialogue we're going to have on this panel about safety and safety considerations, since rail safety is a big topic in the country, and there are ongoing queries for local communities about, well, what's the additional or lesser safety of hydrogen-propelled rail systems for freight, when that freight might be toxic substances or it may be flammable substance like carts of oil. So we're going to come back to that in a moment, but with that, I'm going to segue over to Jonathan for another deep insight in a few minutes' time to help us set the context of the dialogue we're about to have here today.
Thanks, Jessica. So what you've got in front of you is a picture of Penticton, which is in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. I am the group CEO for Cool Management Group. Cool is a Syilx word meaning to work, to make, to create. Comes from the root word kulanchuten, which is the word for creator. And we have a number of companies, aggregate mines. We've got a significant development, and I'm going to try to see if I can you see my mouse as I move that over the screen?
No, unfortunately not. So I think we're going to need you to verbalize it.
Okay, not to worry. I've got no shortage of words. So pretty much everything you're seeing from the valley up is reserve. So there's 47,000 acres of reserve. One of the largest reserves. It is the largest reserve in BC. And pretty much at the foot of that mountain is what used to be the Kettle Valley Railway. The Kettle Valley Railway was land that was expropriated from the band way back, and we're literally at the end of receiving that expropriated land back into reserve. So when we look at things like Hydrail, we're not looking only at the technology, we're looking at a number of very significant justice issues. So the Kettle Valley Railway has been filled with oil spills, damage to the land. Historically, the railway would go straight past people's houses, obviously making a huge amount of noise. And so, the chief and council are particularly interested in how do we participate in the next economy, which we see as being a hydrogen-focused economy, and how do we do that? So the chief and our research partners at UBC went to Germany, and they rode on Alstom's Lint, and they came back really excited to see how they could do that in Canada. And our partnership with UBCO, who are sort of the technology leads, as it were, on the hydrogen rail side for us, you know, the part that we bring to that is we're saying, well, you know, we really buy into a hydrogen economy. We really like the idea of a hydrogen rail system. One of the biggest challenges on implementing that is jurisdictional, and I would just say a general lack of interest or lack of appetite from existing ministries to really engage with Hydrail. I think they don't understand that. Their go-to model is let's keep expropriating land and keep widening highways, and the assumption is that over the next 40 years they're just going to keep doing that. So our business model is primarily based on reducing the cost of continued widening of highways through the Okanagan Valley, which is estimated about $2 billion over the next 40 years. So that is the foundation for our business model. And we would like to be participants in that economy. So if we assume that jurisdictionally we can facilitate hydrogen rail coming through our territories more quickly and efficiently, our expectation would be that rail providers, rather than come to First Nations after the fact, engage with us right up front, so that we can be true partners in that whole evolution and economy. So we're involved in a number of hydrogen sites. We're involved in the hydrogen production and distribution, also power to gas with Fortis BC. We're forming some contracts and partnerships and nailing down relationships as we speak. Our focus is on a decentralized microgrid model as far as hydrogen production. We want to co-locate production and supply rather than sort of emphasizing a very decentralized approach. There are a number of reasons for that, I think, which could really add to the security of our energy security, not just for the nation, not just for the First Nation, but for Canada as a whole. So yeah, so we're very excited about moving that forward. There are a number of different pieces that we understand have to be done at the same time. This is not a linear process by any means. So we're wanting to participate in the supply of hydrogen, the distribution of hydrogen, as well as the facilitation of a hydrogen rail system through traditional territory. And we want to be partners in that whole conversation. I think that's enough of an introduction.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jonathan. And given that my family used to pack up all the 4 girls into a station wagon, drive across the Rocky Mountains, and find our way into a motel in Penticton every summer, I'm very happy to see that beautiful image of my childhood vacation home in that entire valley. Now, it does speak to the imagery of what we're trying to get here is zero emissions, environmentally friendly mass rail, which would move people, freight and goods. And with regards to that, I'm going to turn right to the first question that's come through, and that emanates actually from our Rail Innovation Initiative as well. So, Jonathan, to some extent, you've heard this before, but the ongoing dialogue is around Hydrail as a large opportunity. We've heard this many times. We have the hydrogen fuel cell stack innovators here. We have hydrogen supply chains across the country. We had Bombardier, which now is going to be under Alstom. So why does Hydrail not exist already? If there's already jobs here and there's already a pressing need for rail and there's already a climate action commitment federally, what is the problem? What is stopping the deployment of Hydrail technologies in Canada? Because it doesn't seem as though we could line up anything more than what's already lined up. So there, we're going to start first off going backward. Jonathan, I'm going to start with you in terms of presentation. Locally and in your community, you've been large advocates with UBCO, as you said. What's stopping the deployment of this kind of technology locally in British Columbia?
Yes, it's interesting. That's my entire career has been focused on business transformation and how do we include large-scale adoption of technology. I would say one of the primary reasons is culture and paradigm within North America. So we've had the opportunity to meet with the Premier in BC, who's highly supportive of what we're trying to do. But when we go down to meet with at the ministry level, I literally feel like I've walked onto another planet and we're speaking a completely different language. There isn't the you have an extreme hyper individualized culture in North America. Everyone wants to drive in their own huge gas guzzling car, and was to feel that sort of level of power. So it is very much a cultural thing in North America that you don't see in Europe. A lot of folk in Europe, not just in the big cities, would never need to own a car because public transport sorted that out. That's not the case in Canada. Canada obviously has huge spaces. There's no real support for public transport in any way, shape, or form. They just discontinued a bus route from Penticton to Vancouver, and so those things really struggle. But people don't necessarily want to travel on public transport, and I think there is some work needed to help North Americans understand the impact of the level of energy they use. So just as an example, you will find in North America, and I'm saying this as an immigrant, so I apologize if I'm being a little bit too upfront, but you would find in North America a real dislike for when America goes into battle in the Middle East, for example. The reason America would be doing that, has been fairly well publicized, is for energy security, and it has to do that. And so people may protest that, but at the end of the day, the reason you need that level of energy security is because you're using almost 5 times more energy than the rest of the world put together. So an important conversation that I'm not hearing in the media or anywhere else is how do we reduce our energy consumption in North America in a way that's compatible with the rest of the world, so that we don't keep requiring to bomb the crap out of other countries, to be completely frank.
So to put a geopolitical context on it, I mean, we're energy hogs, right? And I think we know that as Canadians, we are one of the world's largest consumers of energy per capita. And putting that in the context of mobility, if I'm hearing correctly your point, Jonathan, there's really no punitive measure against energy intense car travel. So it's not so much about how to motivate hydrogen or Hydrail, it's about how to motivate people out of their car and into public transport, which would create the clientele for any kind of rail, including hydrogen.
And I think, but what I would say is the conversation, the same with these sorts of things, is very technology focused. I don't think the technology is the problem. What we've won is we need to win people's hearts and minds. And I think that's the part of the conversation that's missing. So just as a classic example, I had a job to implement CCTV cameras as part of in the Metropolitan London. They struggled with that for over 7 years. We went through a process of evaluating the sort of sociological, psychological change, and we changed the term from CCTV cameras to safety cameras. Straight away, within a matter of, I would say, weeks or months, the legislation changed and we were able to implement that whole system. So when we look at implementing something like Hydrail and a Hydrail economy, the question I'm looking at are what are those emotional and heartstrings that we need to be pulling on to motivate a population towards adopting this type of technology. So that's the primary area that I'm really interested in, and that's where we start touching on trying to get politicians to be willing to move and invest into the space.
Okay, so shifting the cultural needle, we've had that dialogue in Canada about converting carbon tax into something called a toxic pollution tax. And would people be more willing to pay for toxic pollution than for carbon, possibly per the point you noted, changing the hearts and minds of folks. So with regards to that and with that cultural overlay, Chris, I'm going to turn to you. What is the obstacle to Hydrail in Canada? Because people have said, well, look, if you're looking for passenger count for a high-end technology, well, then go from Toronto to Montreal. There is the ridership. Minus COVID, the ridership is potentially there. In particular, if a few levers were imposed on the highway between those two cities, that is probably the lowest hanging fruit, and a whole bunch of hydrogen innovators and rail sectors all along that corridor. So why is it not happening? Chris, any insights there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. That's a 1,500 kilometer corridor with almost 20 million people living there. I think there's a historical element here. A lot of the growth that happened in North America happened, since the Second World War. With a subsidy of sort of an artificially low price of oil, that has sort of created a society that we've built up around the automobile. So it's not a greenfield site that we're able to sort of, design a new system as we would have it from the start. We're evolving from communities, suburbs, cities, that have, to a large extent, been built around access to travel via individual automobile. So we've got that legacy that we're dealing with, and that's got nothing to do with hydrogen. That's got to do with what are the most economical, and maybe not economical, but what are the most effective and desirable ways of people to get around. The way that people have desired to get around, to Jonathan's point, historically, especially in North America, across vast distances. I mean, let's keep in mind how big Canada is and what a narrow strip of population that we have that sort of lives fairly close to the U.S. border. Not in all cases, but when you look at the population writ large, the vast majority live within a short drive or train ride of the U.S. border. So we've got a very long, thin population base, with the exception of the corridor that we're talking about now. Historic, the rail system, the nation was built on the rail system in terms of moving goods back and forth. So we have a rail system here. We have a proposal for a high-frequency rail system to turn what is a hub and spoke model into more of a network model, where we can get not just from central places, population centers, to other population centers, but to all the places in between. So from a barriers point of view, I think one of the barriers was one that was touched on by Minister McKenna when she was speaking today just before lunch, and that is, what is our infrastructure vision for Canada? What is the infrastructure vision? What is the rail vision? What is the mobility vision? Because in the absence of such a vision, I think she made the point very well, in the absence of such a vision, we're talking about projects. And we can't continue to have project-based infrastructure development that's not aligned with that full-time vision. So the question really is, what is the vision, and in what ways are these actions consistent with that vision? If our vision is to have public transit for all, in what ways is this consistent with that vision? In what ways is this consistent with the strategy that we're implementing? And the strategy, we get down to levels like what Jonathan was talking about distributed generation of hydrogen. If we're going to have a hydrogen rail network, if it's going to be stopping at depots along the way, in what ways is the vision of creating local hydrogen consistent with the vision of a network? Yes, I would say that is consistent. So the question is really building a vision, building a strategy, and then that's not necessarily to say that we have to have a plan for how we're going to do all this. It's just to have a North Star that we can check against as we are building this mobility system. Are the barriers technological? I think we're demonstrating that we have the capability of overcoming the technological barriers. So I think barriers go a little bit deeper than that.
Okay, and we're going to come back to that, because it'd be good to know, the island has launched, and there is hydrogen rail in Europe, and there's, of course, a lot more rail, and we know that rail is 80% passenger and 20% freight in Europe, and it's the reverse in Canada. So we got to figure out, well, what's the solution? And clearly the solution's not giving birth to a whole bunch of babies to grow our population to make that happen. We could immigrate a whole bunch of people to make that happen, but barring that, what is the solution for rail in a context where we stay with a thin population in spread out over a long distance? How do we make it happen in a Canadian context? So we're going to come back to that. Noah, insight into why is Hydrail not happening in Canada today, given that we've got all the market readiness factors from a supply chain and demonstration side?
I think it's an interesting question. It's one that we continue to evaluate at Alstom, work with all of our regional stakeholders within Canada in particular. We know that this has been a topic around Toronto as well, as they look with the regional express rail system, the very ambitious program, to not only electrify, but to expand accessibility and transportation within the greater Toronto region. So Hydrail is naturally a question that comes up, and I think it's something that has been and will continue to be evaluated. This is, again, where we talk a little bit around the infrastructure question. I think Chris touched on it a little bit as well, as what's the true vision for this? The infrastructure question can probably be better answered by experts like Chris, but when we look at a rolling stock technology perspective, we're growing the capabilities of what that technology can be. The island is the introduction globally to what we can have as a hydrogen-powered or true green solution when we come into passenger rail mobility. This is continuing to expand. So we're working within ourselves within our partners to develop further technologies to gain greater accessibility to other markets and areas they're not quite accessible yet. So if I think about other areas where it could be significantly beneficial is, we talked briefly about overall consumption of energy. The greatest consumers of energy are our city centers. So what do we have in our city centers? We have bus networks, we have our metro systems, and we have our regional rail systems, which tend to either be diesel or electric powered. Now, obviously, you're going to pay the piper for electric generation. So as we continue to develop our hydrogen technology, we are working towards a solution that we can displace some of that electric generation with a self-sustaining power such as hydrogen for future opportunities. But it's the question is as well, it's the changing of the mindset. I think, the point made earlier around the position of those that have been out there, it's a new technology. It requires further market expansion and wider adoption to help improve our supply chain, and that will in turn lower our overall cost of acquisition and development. This helps further expand this network. We are a diesel-based rail service and system within North America, Canada, and the U.S. very much. Right? I think of CN, I think of CP, this huge diesel locomotive fleets. This is the problem that we're trying to solve. Right? We can displace those or a percentage of those with a cleaner, greener fuel. That's really going to develop a win for all. But we have to make sure that it's a sustainable win. It's not something that's unsustainable.
So to that point, Cummins did buy out Hydrogenics, and so now North America's biggest diesel engine maker is a hydrogen leader in fuel cell stack. So that's a kind of writing on the wall. We can see where things are going. Now, having built on that, let's say, this morning in my opening speech, I talked about road pricing and the criticality of road pricing, whether it's toll roads or pricing kilometers, some kind of signal that gets people out of their cars and into mass mobility. Let's say that existed. Let's say in Canada, we got that going. And let's say the federal government, like Mr. McKenna, came in and said, okay, as a federal funding partner, here's a lot of money to offset and de-risk this high-end technology. What is the potentiality for Siemens and Alstom in particular to support the fueling system side of the equation? Because maybe you've got the rail technology, but doesn't propel itself. So to what extent are you ready to support the cities and the fueling system if we envision that people are going to get out of their cars, get into a system that's being de-risked by the taxpayer, and they're going to start in Toronto, and maybe the GO train system is hydrogen fuel cell electrified, and then VIA takes them to Montreal on hydrogen fuel cells, and then they get onto the EXO train to get out into the suburbs around Montreal on hydrogen fuel cell. If there were that kind of network of regional rail combined with VIA, where's Alstom and Siemens as players in helping that fueling system crop up? Because that is an ongoing barrier that we're hearing from not just the rail side, but from the cities and regions that are being asked to do this. There's no infrastructure for fueling, and without support, it's not going to happen. So Chris, we'll start with you, and then Noah, will turn to you. Question about supply chain and the fueling side of the equation for rail hydrogen electrification.
Well, we're really seeing the hydrogen economy turn a corner now in terms of the amount of interest that we've had for our electrolyzer technology. So, we produce the electrolyzer, we produce a lot of the components, but we're not the developers. And of course, with the heavy reliance on the electricity and the dependence on the electricity price, you really have a situation where you need to be very careful with where you site these things. What are the regulations? What are the agreements around developing the hydrogen site and pricing it in a way that's going to be that's going to align with the demand for not just trains, but other types of mobility and other types of uses, like I showed in the slide at the beginning. We have an Teresa touched on it earlier when she was talking. My colleague Teresa from Siemens, when she was talking about e-bus charging. It really is a system, and it's a system of systems, because we need to understand exactly what are the supply sources and the demands for electricity, because hydrogen is electrification in the sense that creating green hydrogen is directly connected to electricity. And historically, when demand has grown for electricity, we've created more power plants. Now that we see renewables coming online, we've taken more of an approach about how do we adjust the demand side to match, or at least to follow the generation. And now I think with hydrogen, we're able to have such a large capacity load that not only is it imperative in the development of the hydrogen ecosystem, but it also lends a hand to grid system management in the sense that we're better able to pair the generation with the load, especially, say, for example, in Ontario, where we have a tremendous amount of nuclear baseload power that often dips into the negative prices for wholesale that we have to unload to neighboring jurisdictions. So here we have a situation where we can use hydrogen as a load center to avoid selling at a negative price, but also achieve the objectives that we're looking for in terms of transit and mobility. So where are the barriers? I think from a price point of view, from a regulatory point of view, we need to see how these fueling stations are going to be sited, and what it means for demand on the power system. Where the demand for hydrogen is going to be from the industrial center, how much storage and compression do you need? Because you may have a situation where you're generating a lot of hydrogen. Mobility will be one application. How much do you store? When do you store it? When do you use it? Where do you use it? Are your industrial sites close to your refueling stations? And then we can get into the other types of mobility around local truck distribution and coach and bus. So it's really a system of systems. The technology is there. The willingness is there. It's a question of making sure that we've got the ecosystem and the partners aligned, and we're working very hard on doing that right across Canada and North America.
So, to Frank, comment on this. Oh, looks like we've got some background noise and a bit of feedback. So maybe, there we go. I think we've solved it out on our end. And so, what we've heard often at CUTRIC, and Noah, I'll get to your answer to that question in just a moment. We've heard, as we're looking at zero emissions buses and looking at fuel cell side, you might have Mississauga or a transit agency look for 10 hydrogen fuel cell buses, which is about 200 to 300 kilograms of hydrogen a day. Of course, we're not going to get the price points we need. If you get to 50 to 100, okay, now you're in the thousands, but really one GO train would be thousands of kilograms of hydrogen a day already. So you want to get into the thousands and the tens of thousands, get the GO train network plus VIA. Now you have a utility play. Now it makes sense for Enbridge to start pumping out loads of hydrogen because there's an immediate absorption of it, right? So that ecosystem you're talking about critically depends on the utilities coming to the table with the electrolyzers to produce it for a mass deployment. You kind of have to do it all at once because it's very hard to do it piecemeal. That's really challenging to move forward. And that's what I'm hearing, Chris, you're articulating from an ecosystem standpoint. The question is, so whose job is it to herd these cats? And so Noah, if I can turn to you, why is it not happening? But also that ecosystem, could we get the utilities involved if we had the price signals, got people into the transit and the rail, could we get that kind of ecosystem going?
Oh, I think so. And I think what we've demonstrated in Europe is that people are attracted by it. They love it, right? So the trains that we have, so 2 units running, currently right now, they've been running for over 18 months and have accumulated, I think it's 180,000 kilometers of total service. Ridership has been fantastic. The overall response has been fantastic. And this has been one where the way we've managed this in our European context is through mobile refueling stations, and it's more of a portable situation of how do we manage the infrastructure side. To move to that next phase, this is where we're looking at permanent infrastructure solutions. And it does require multiple different parties. So it's not only your rolling stock providers, critical infrastructure, energy suppliers, as well as you and Chris have touched on as well. It's really kind of a global movement, and the responsibility of herding the cats, as you said, it is one that is not particularly clear. Or we all have tried, I'm sure that Jonathan can speak to this pretty clearly of how are we working to herd all of those cats and get to where we want to be, and who's, how do we rope everyone in together, get them in the same room, come to the agreement on the appropriate way forward, because it feels as though we're all kind of moving in different paths of what we think is the correct direction. And opportunities like this, the speaking engagement today, is a great place for us to kind of work together to concurrently agree this is the appropriate way forward for all of us within industry of how do we work together to really accomplish these goals and put these first full zero emissions Hydrail systems in Canada and the United States, because it's very clear we need this. We need this sooner rather than later.
And so into that, I'm going to turn to you for a segue question off that. Let's say, you have been herding the cats. You've been trying to. And let's say tomorrow morning you wake up and everybody in government gets it. And everybody's on your side politically and administratively. And we want to make this happen. The question from John Ulakovic here and a couple others on the line on the virtual platform is, well, what's the business case then? So can you give us a sense in your community, based on the application of Hydrail that you're looking at in specifically the community you identified, is it a cost savings? Is it a water issue? Is it an air quality issue? Where's the business case, and is it triple bottom line, and what's that business case look like? Oh, 1 second, Jonathan, looks like you're just on mute there. There you go. Go ahead, we've got you.
Yeah, I think everything we're trying to do is triple bottom line. The business case at the moment in the Okanagan is not based on passenger numbers. We don't have those numbers. It'll be based on a cost saving to the Ministry of Transport over the longer period of time. So that's sort of where the business case lies. But in addition to the business case, we are seeing that as a critical move that will create a number of other opportunities, a number of other things. This is so much not a linear process at all. Just as an example, we are fortunate in that we have a 1,000 unit high-end luxury residential development. So on the next phase of that, we have 200 units where we're implementing an integrated solution between solar, hydrogen, and battery that allows the house to exist completely off-grid. Excess hydrogen from the house gets put into a feedstock and gathered for sort of spreading through the ecosystem. And you've got John Quinn on this conference has spoken from Fortis BC. They seem to be highly motivated as a utility to start moving in this direction, not just of cleaning up the grid, but of actually supporting a move towards hydrogen. And that's very exciting to see. So, for me, I think if we focus on a business case for any individual component part of this hydrogen economy, I think it's not always easy to do out of the gate. It's a bit like putting a railway line across the US back in the Wild West days. The business case was based on optimism that more opportunities would arise, but it wasn't necessarily as completely easy to define as politicians would often want. So I think it's going to require a lot of partners to just put their foot into the game, and we're doing that on our development side, housing development side, with the won't say hope, with the expectation that things have to change in this direction.
So it's a build it and they will come hope. And we've heard that a lot in rail, but what you're identifying also is it's triple bottom line. Maybe emissions, air quality savings, healthcare and infrastructure savings, maybe job creation, and that has indirect benefits to the economy. And we've heard this idea of build it in rail and they will come from Calgary to Banff, Nanaimo to Victoria, and other jurisdictions around Canada. And of course, the criticism of that is, are we building a white elephant that nobody is going to actually ride? And so if we can, ask for some insight, Noah, from your side of the equation, you have the Karate Island. I mean, Alstom's been behind this and deployed in. Yeah, there were pilot and prototyping kind of the technology, but presumably Alstom's heading into this technology because it sees a business case. There must be a business case. You're not a welfare organization. You're there to make a profit. So what is the business case that Alstom is banking on?
Well, I mean, again, we're trying to be responsible corporate citizens first and foremost, and understanding we can't be naive to the energy consumption issues and just overall energy crisis that we're currently facing. We need to be continually looking forward. And if we're waiting around, depending upon technology of the past, we will be left in the dust by our competitors. That is not a position from a business perspective that we want to be in. It also helps that it's a socially responsible position as well. This is, green technology, and being a leader in green rail technology is a really important aspect of Alstom's corporate culture. It is key to our DNA to be their true global leader. So this is not just something we look at from a business perspective, but again, from a social consciousness of this is our responsibility as a technology leader to take our best and brightest to help deliver this new improved technology to help us into a modern era. So this is something, again, we will have to continue to work through and develop. And I mentioned it a little earlier, around the supply chain, the overall interest, the demand. This is the area we're working as well with our other stakeholders to help cultivate and grow. Because again, so many of our other, our customers, our suppliers, they're based in, a traditional rolling stock mentality of traction, propulsion, et cetera. Whereas we're pulling in some of these new concepts by working with hydrogenics or fuel cells. Ballard is another key proponent of fuel cell technology in North America and globally. How do we integrate this better? How do we expand the supply chain? What does the battery supply chain look like? Because again, hydrogen is not simply a hydrogen fuel cell concept, it's hydrogen fuel cell as well as battery. So they kind of go part and parcel with one another. So as those supply chains develop and expand, I mean, Tesla has done tremendous work for the battery industry, not only within North America, but globally as well, to help expand that supply chain and help expand the demand and show what is really possible. So we try to take some of those lessons and help push ourselves in that appropriate direction. And I think the success we've had so far in Germany, as we continue to grow in France and globally, we hope to continue to pull that into North America because, again, as we've said, I think there's tremendous opportunity for growth in Canada in particular. Areas in the United States, Southern California is a key area to focus on. I mean, Stadler has signed a contract with San Bernardino to develop a single hydrogen fuel cell train. We feel as though the opportunity is greater within that region and everywhere else within the immediate North Americas.
So it's really about staying competitive, right, in a landscape where you either innovate ahead or you get left behind. But let's be honest, the geopolitical context is there's not that many major rail companies around the world that can compete at a certain level for certain kinds of contracts and major rail projects. And the geopolitical competition is really coming out of China, right, and Chinese rail systems. And so if I'm understanding the subtext of what's going on here, it's about staying competitive in a globalized world where there's a major competition emerging from a country that's pumped a lot of money into developing zero emissions technologies and high-speed rail systems. And on that point, I mean, I'd love to know from Chris, your perspective as well, whether the business case is there because Siemens is really preparing itself for this kind of global competition, despite the fact that it's hard to get these rail projects out the door in Canada. Geopolitically and globally, it is the way of the future, and we see that forging ahead in Asia in particular.
Well, I mean, if the question is the business case there? I mean, yeah, the business case is there. The competition is also there, as you pointed out. So it is a race and it is a competition to see who can bring their costs down. I mean, Siemens, Alstom, European manufacturers have a long history and a track record of success in their diesel, but also in electric. And hydrogen is a step in that in the generation. So there's a lot of history, a lot of knowns, and some unknowns. So the question is, what do we need to do to make sure that we're out in front of this technology? And I think Alstom and Siemens are both, competing in this global marketplace to make sure that we are out in front, bringing the prices down, working with a Canadian partner, Ballard, which is a success for Ballard and success for Canada to be working with Siemens in doing this exact thing, which is bringing the cost down as quickly as possible, and doing so at the same time on the hydrogen production side. I mean, we're seeing technology development on the electrolysis, as I noted by the size of the device that we're showcasing. Economy of scale operates, is a function in this market too. So Canada is a great, opportunity for this as long as we line things up. We've got low cost of power. We've got a tremendous amount of renewable energy that, if we use it properly, can result in low price hydrogen. We've got surplus baseload nuclear in Ontario that we can deal with. We've got a growing population. We've got a network of cities. So it's a question of how do we continue to stay on the front side of this wave and continue operating in a way that's going to keep us ahead of the competition.
So Chris, I'm going to stay with you because we're going to end on last comments. I'm going to ask you, Chris, Noah, Jonathan, for your last 30-second commentary about, in terms of the future of rail, what has to happen in Canada, and specifically future of Hydrail. What advice would you give to Minister McKenna if she were sitting there next to you, or Minister Garneau in transportation? How do we get Hydrail out the door in Canada? Over to you, Chris, for final comments.
Sure. Well, I think it's too easy to say that all we need is a vision and all we need is a decision, and then everything will fall into place. You know, that's simply not true. So it's not fair for us to push back and just say, oh, that's what needs to happen. That's part of what needs to happen, certainly. But as I said, it's an ecosystem, it's a network, it's a system of systems. We need to line up regulators as well as producers and consumers, utilities, and all the groups need to see what the benefit of this is, what the long term of it is, what are the thresholds, what are the barriers, how do we systematically reduce those, how do we share the risk, and together I think we can work these things out. It does take leadership, but it's not all it takes. We have to work together to achieve it.
As well as design and system deployment. Noah, how do we get more rail and specifically Hydrail out the door in Canada?
I think first and foremost, it starts with incentivization of the stakeholders, right? If we're trying to incorporate this new technology, why don't we incentivize the cities, the principalities, municipal areas to move towards, right? If we're comparing diesel to hydrogen, if there's an incentive for that municipality to go with hydrogen instead of a diesel project, for example. There's other ways to credit via taxes, other items to incentivize communities to want to move towards this. This will also in turn help the infrastructure grow as well as the competition grow around hydrogen technologies and rail. I think that's one. We need to help. This is a way to help change the mindset to really start shifting towards what we do. I mean, just think about it for a small example of solar panels on people's homes. The amount of solar panels that popped up as soon as federal government started providing incentives and tax relief to put solar panels on their homes, everybody started putting solar panels on their homes. We're starting to reap some of the benefits now. So I think of it in the same concept of if we work towards global, larger incentivization, we'll really see some real tremendous growth and progress.
So systems level planning combined with incentivization. And Jonathan, over to you for final words. How do we get more rail and Hydrail out the door in your 30-second wrap up?
Yeah, I agree with what's just been said. I think I actually am very optimistic. Some of the papers that have come out, and I think some of the things you guys have supported through CUTRIC are exactly what is needed at this time. And part of that is just helping educate government around how to build Hydrail and rail solutions into their long-term strategy. I don't think they've adequately done that, and I think they don't fully appreciate how fast the technology has come. And so a lot of the plans that we're working with were developed 1990, 1980, and are still being rolled out. And I think from a long-term planning point of view, I think that needs to be, this technology and this conversation needs to feed into that. And I think politicians need to be held accountable for what those plans are going to look like. If we're going to take the 2030 goals that we have around clean BC, the impact on Hydrail alone are going to be significant contributors to those numbers. So I think it's a matter of embedding these opportunities into the long-term government strategies, and I haven't quite seen that yet.
Mm-hmm. So maybe the end solution is getting Greta Thunberg and all the youth to start suing our governments, as they say they will, in order to hold us to account to the targets we set. And that might lead to the incentivization, the collaborative planning that we need to get Hydrail and rail out the door. Thank you very much to all three of you, Chris, Noah, Jonathan, for insights into rail and Hydrail. This was a snippet insight into what we're going to be doing later this fall, which is a full 2-day conference on rail innovation in Canada. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much, everyone, for a great panel.